Greetings. I am Queen Diambi Kabatuswila Chiyoyomwata Mukalenga Mukajiwa Nkashama Wabakwaluntu Wabaluba Wakasai wa Congo. That is traditional queen of the Order of the Leopard of the Bakwaluntu people who are part of the Luba ethnic group in Kasai in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I am also Grande Mai do Povo Bantu Brasileiro, that is traditional queen of the African descendants of Brazil. And I am also Reina de los Congo de Panama, that is traditional queen of the Congo descendants of Panama. I am also a psychologist and I am a mental health counselor. I also am a practitioner of complementary and alternative medicine, although I do not practice psychology as much as I used to because of my work as a queen now. I am still very, very concerned about the state of our mental health as a collective. So today I'm grateful for being invited in this summit that is going to be called Tapping the Source, because it's about how to reconnect with the deeper self in order to alleviate mental health struggles and the effect in one's life. So first of all, it's important that we identify that mental health struggles are not necessarily so present everywhere in the world in the same form. In places where people are still struggling for comfort to meet the most basic needs, for some reason it seems like mental health is not always such a concern. And it's quite surprising for me when I travel around the world, when I go to places where people have the least, I see the most happiness manifested and least existential questions, when you know that what you have to focus on is to get food on the table because you don't know if you're going to be eating today, or where you're going to get water, or if you are in a war zone and you have to escape being captured and tortured and raped and so forth. For some reason, self-awareness or fulfillment, self-realization doesn't become, quite part of your daily concerns. So it's quite interesting to see the contrast to where you have now people and societies where basically having food is not a problem anymore because it's all around you. Having a shelter is definitely not an issue. Having clothes is actually the opposite. We have too much of them. And a society where we have moved away from also community living, rather we have adopted a more individualistic model. It seems like those societies also seem to yield much more stress, mental health stress for some reason. So there is a lot of research being done about that, which is of course obviously normal. When you are focusing your attention into survival or just living, it's hard to start making evaluation on the quality of your life. You just want to live. But once you have all of those needs met, then it becomes an issue to see if if you are happy, if you are self-realized, and then you start having, of course, other interests to see your life flourish in so many ways. But also we cannot fail to recognize that it's also the exposure to some type of idea that there is an ideal about how life should look like, how life should be like, because we are so exposed to media and to standards that are superimposed on many of our societies, where this is how life should look like. This is how a relationship between a man and a woman should look like. This is how your house should look like. This is how you should dress. This is how you should feel. This is how you should vacation. This is how you should basically consume. And when we are ready and able to meet those standards, oftentimes, you feel like you've arrived, and you can see that you can measure your life with a certainty of success. But if you are struggling to reach those objectives that are usually unattainable for most people, then it can be a great source of frustration because you are not like the Kardashian lifestyle, or you are not able to travel in those places, you are not able to buy these clothes, you are not able to consume these goods. So a lot of stress is put on an individual sometimes just so they can meet those standards that are set in such high levels that most people are not able to meet those standards. And I myself, as a psychologist, have worked a lot, for instance, into women issues with weight and food relationship in the Western world, where that's the problem that, of course, doesn't appear in countries like in the Congo, in my villages, where people eat only what they need so they can survive, as opposed to when you are in the US, where there's so much food around you that you are bombarded with advertising, and access is so easy that food becomes almost just like a consumer good, just for the pleasure and the sake of it, not necessarily to feed oneself. And so these women who eventually will gain weight because the type of diet is not appropriate, become very obsessed with their weight and very disturbed, and sometimes can yield to mental, and mental health disorders. And cause a lot of stress. So it's really quite interesting in my position as a traditional queen, because I'm in both worlds. I grew up also in Congo, but I also lived in Europe and in the Americas, in the United States in particular. And I have had the ability to contrast and compare quite interestingly. I see a lot more mental stress, emotional stress as well, in societies that are so-called highly developed. And it is also maybe part of the fact that we don't live in tight communities as we used to, in the way human society has evolved. Was always that we lived in a community, we depended on each other, and we knew that the burden of our survival was not ours alone, but was a burden shared with the entire community, as opposed to today in so-called Western societies, where there is an economic model that's more like a capitalistic economic model. The burden of the survival is really put up on the individual, him or herself. So if you cannot make it, it's on you and nobody else. And so it takes away that ability to rely on communities to deal with some of the challenges that we can face while we are trying to meet those needs to live and survive and thrive, of course. And I must also say, because I'm a psychologist and I was trained in classical Western psychology, that there is what we can call also the Maslow scale, which is a scale where once you have your basic needs met, then you start aspiring to meet other needs, including a need of self-realization and the pursuit of happiness in a form that is not just about meeting your basic needs. So of course, once we are there is a whole industry that's developed to cater to those particular needs to develop in other spheres. So intellectually, of course, emotionally, we want to experience different things, and of course, there is a demand for elevation of and self-realization that will sometimes come about. Oftentimes, people who are in a break of a mental health stress are people who have experienced some kind of traumatic experiences. And of course, we have to be very careful when we talk about trauma. Trauma depend on the person that's living the trauma. So something might not seem traumatic to you or to another person. That's not the standard of what trauma is. And obviously, we have some very prominent ideas about what trauma looks like in many different instances. Physical trauma, sexual trauma, abuse, endangerment of life, difficult life circumstances, verbal abuse, risk to one's life for either an accident or war. So there are all those very standard ones that are recognized collectively, but they can also be personal experiences that may be considered traumatic for the person experiencing them, but not necessarily for the majority of the community. So it's very important that we respect the fact that trauma can be very diverse and different depending on the person who's experiencing the trauma. But oftentimes, after a very difficult or challenging experiences, difficult and challenging experience, many people come to a breaking point, sometimes to evaluate and to measure their lives. And when in the Western world we have been bombarded by ideas and images of success that are about the things we own, that are about the food we've eaten or the place we've eaten, the clothes we wear, the type of house we live in, the type of vacation we have taken, and how far we have gone, and how luxurious it was, the type of car we drive, the type of university we went to or we can afford to put our children, or the kind of school. So all of that, once we realize that sometimes we've done all that we could so we can afford to meet up with those standards, and many who have met them and even surpassed them start to come to realize that they're not happy. And they start realizing that there is an emptiness in their lives. And it's not something that can necessarily be explained in the immediate, but oftentimes where they have focused so much on achieving material well-being or development in some areas of their life, they have sacrificed and sometimes fail to see that they were losing themselves, they were losing the essence of how to be a human being and what it really takes to be a human being, and the fundamental core about what it is to be a human being. And oftentimes, it all, for me, sums up to the perception of self as a sacred and divine energy manifested into a human that is having a peculiar experience as a spiritual, force encased in a material body. So oftentimes we are so caught up into our daily lives where we run around because we have to meet all kinds of needs and especially all kinds of wants, that we get caught up in a system of more is never enough. And we keep on going and going and going, and we try to fit everything, to calibrate every action that we take in life so it can resemble, an ideal that we have constructed for ourselves based on the images that are bombarded to us, and realizing when we get there sometimes that we have really exhausted ourselves, but we have not gained in any, in any maturity in terms of our core and the way we feel about who we are. And sometimes I've seen many patients come in, for instance, very successful businessmen, realizing that they're very successful indeed, they have provided for their families, but they feel empty because there is an emptiness around them. The connection with the spouse, or the connection with the children, the connection with the rest of the family, and sometimes the connection even with the friends have been lost in the way of achieving these material gains. And sometimes it can leave a person with a very a huge sentiment of emptiness and loneliness. And on the other hand, that's when you have people who are successful. But then on the other hand, you have the people who are struggling to get even there, close to there, realizing that I will never get there, I'm not good enough, and they put a lot of stress on themselves. They measure themselves against those standards that are unachievable in reality, but they really push hard and they want to get there, and it causes them a lot of anxiety and stress because they obviously, something is telling them inside that something is wrong. So a lot of the people that I've seen in my practice come in with situation and condition of depression, condition of anxiety, condition of extreme stress, condition of panic, sometimes experiencing panic attack, are oftentimes related to some kind of trauma. That can be either a deep trauma, that is those that I have mentioned before, but can also be trauma that are caused by the daily pursuit of a happiness that is elusive because it's not real, it's really imaginary. So many people start to ask themselves and come to a brink of breaking point where they say something's wrong and we need to do something because there is something just not working. They have a sense of emptiness, a sense of loneliness, a sense of disconnection, and can really torment one deeply. So the encouragement, of course, has been into saying, well, you have to do self improvement. You have to start working on yourself, and realizing there's different modalities and practices. And one of them that I just want to cite here is the amazing work Master Shah is doing, promoting and proposing the Tao calligraphy, Tao song, Tao sound, and Tao water in his work that he does every week, to help people find a modality with which they can reconnect deeply with who they truly are. So it's important that we understand that it's the path to realize who you are is the path of realization or achievement of nirvana, when you can become the architect of your life as you wish, and that you are not affected by the outside anymore as you were when you were depending on the outcome of your actions, but rather that you depend on how you feel inside. And that you can use different practices to elevate your level of consciousness, to promote better health care in terms of your mental health. So mental health, just like physical health, have to be taken care of. And of course, there is many different modalities, but spirituality, some might find religion to be a good avenue. Some might use other techniques like sports, but more and more people are going towards more organic techniques like spiritual work, like meditation, breathing exercise, yoga, the wonderful Tao work and Tao calligraphy that is proposed by Master Shah, and different modality of using sound and vibration energy, and also sound and energy in water, for instance, like the Tao water that Master Shah is proposing to many. And so those are different modalities now that people are starting to use more and more to integrate into their daily practice, so that they can get there. They can get to a place of inner peace and inner balance. Because at the end of the day, what these practices tend to do is to make us okay and to bring us in a peaceful place with ourselves as we are, and to make us realize that we are already perfect because we are created perfect. We come in this world manifested because of a perfect intention for life to thrive. So that's what we are in the core, but it requires sometimes unlearning some information that we've been bombarded with since we are children by a society that is designed to make us feel dissatisfied about who we are, so that we can turn into perfect consumers of all kinds of goods and services to make us believe that with this or that, I will be better. I will reach that, goal of, realization of the perfect life, which is obviously not realistic, because life is meant to be imperfectly perfect. So to learn with ancient practices and ancient philosophy, as some of the ones that are coming from the continent of Africa, because I am myself a priestess of Obatala, and high priestess of the water energy. And we use these to really try to bring the person back to the source, to reconnect back with the source, because the source is not only where we belong, but it's also an amplifier of who we are. So when we use these alternative practices to bring about a great mental health, they are usually a commitment first have to come, that the life that I used to live before, I do not want to live anymore, because it's a life that was creating me to disorganize my whole energy system and to feel stress, anxiety, and depression. Of course, there are things that are in the behaviors that are things that need to be modified. Could be behavior that we are doing, or behavior that are being done onto us. It could be an environment that is a toxic environment. It could be things that have to be changed in the environment in which we live. So I'm not saying that only internal work can just transform everything around, but I'm saying that because you do that internal work, that you can be more advised and more inclined to have a critical and honest look on your outside circumstances, in order for you to also gain the courage to make the changes that you need to do to bring about a more sane and happy environment for you to thrive as a human being on this planet. So the work that we have to do in terms of spirituality, integrating different modalities of care, as meditation, for instance, as calligraphy, the tracing, the Tao calligraphy, or the chanting, or the dancing and movement, or hypnosis, or NLPs, or all the other different practices that are out there. They are meant for us to reopen our centers of energy, so that we can reconnect with the source that is abundant, that comes to replenish us, as we are constantly bombarded with all kinds of elements that are there to basically decay or deter, our ability to understand that we are source ourselves. And so when we are, and when we become more in balance with and harmony with the true being that we are, and that we are becoming more and more aware that we are the source ourselves, then we become aware of our potency, of our power to act, to transform the reality that is manifested. So at the end of the day, when we get there, oftentimes the transformation I see, it's to see people getting more and more involved into doing things to help others and to do things of service. The more people grow in these spiritual practices, the more grounded they become into connecting with the source, the more they expand themselves outward into the world to manifest this love into the world by doing actions of service towards others. So and it's kind of like work as a boomerang, because the more actions of love you do out there, the more you gain in power in that connection with that energy source, and the greater you feel about who you are, and the closest you become aware of the purpose of your life, that is really to facilitate life in general to thrive. So you, as a component of life, has a mission to make sure life thrives. And so, of course, it's not just about you. You have to maintain yourself in good form, in good shape, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, so that you can be an agent and a very potent actor into making sure that you contribute to the promotion of life, so that life can thrive on this planet, and life in all its forms. So you can invest yourself in helping people, you can invest yourself in helping nature and doing things to make sure that the environment, is preserved and is safe. You can also invest yourself in helping animals, or and think. So it's any kind of life. You can just focus on giving that energy and praying and caring for others. So for me, I've seen a lot of the resolution of mental health problem being to first realize that we are sometimes in a society where once we have our needs met, we go to the extra miles to meet standards that are not realistic, and to put extreme pressure on ourselves and into our relationships to fit a model that is quite unrealistic sometimes. And also, it's important when we take a decision that we want to make changes to realize that there are tools out there that are tools of alternative and complementary medicine, and especially spiritual tools that help an individual, once they make a decision, to ground themselves and connect to the source of who, and tap into who they truly are. And once they do, oftentimes the fruits of that, or the manifested healing, comes in form of a person who's dedicated to serve others, to serve life, so like life can thrive. So this is what I would say my take is on mental health, and what we can do to continue promoting, mental health is to continue to use different tools and different modalities that are offered to us to really reconnect and to be so connected that all we wish to do is see others connected and happy as well. Thank you so much for having me in this panel, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak at this absolutely wonderful event that Master Shah has organized today for us, and hopefully it will have brought some insight to anyone who have questions about the processes of mental health pain and mental health struggle, and how to overcome. And that's just my take on it. Thank you so much.